Can Afghanistan ever be stable? There was a joke that was circulating around, when the US made a disastrous pullout from Afghanistan, in August 2021. The joke read something like this: if you ever feel useless, remember, it took 4 US presidents, $3 trillion, countless lives and 20 years, for the United States, to replace Taliban, with Taliban. It's a reminder, that Afghanistan returned under the control of Taliban, in 2021, despite enormous efforts put in by the foreign powers, and the democratic institutions of Afghanistan. For a long time, Afghanistan has been a quagmire, a sinkhole, for every foreign power, that tried to control it. However, when there was no foreign power invading it, Afghanistan still had constant internal conflicts, between the various kingdoms, or warlords. Only for a small fraction of Afghanistan's long history, spanning several millennia, it had found stable, peaceful periods, under the rule of the Persians, Indians, Greeks, and others. We're interested in looking at the current scenario, and answer this simple question. Can Afghanistan ever become stable? To get the answer to this question in today's context, you need to understand the complex web of powers, that control Afghanistan currently. You may believe that Taliban is the one that controls and rules Afghanistan. Though it is true, you must remember, the Taliban was the same power that was defeated so easily, in a few weeks' time, by the American and NATO allies, in 2001. How did they come back to power? How did they send the Americans packing? Do they have the strength to control the entire Afghanistan? I know those are a bunch of questions. Let's try to understand the nature of Taliban power. For starters, Taliban and its entire group, is a hardcore religious unit, with additional military training. It's not a sophisticated, educated, intellectual, political power, that had won the people's confidence, in a democratic election. Taliban regained power in 2021, due to the general discontent, amongst many warlords and militants, against the presence of the American forces. Despite the money that was poured in by many foreign powers for security, stability, and infrastructure development, it was very easy to galvanize the youth of Afghanistan, in the name of religion. The large number of civilian deaths caused by the air raids and bombings, helped the Taliban's cause, to paint the foreign powers as evil, and the democratic leadership in Kabul, as their puppets, filled with corruption, and greed. Afghanistan is a country with mountains, almost everywhere. The 4 major cities of Afghanistan, Kabul, Mazar-e-Sharif, Herat, and Kandahar, don't have the best of connectivity, by roads or railways. The transport infrastructure, which was ruined in the 1980s and the 1990s, were redeveloped in many areas, by the US and other foreign governments, but Afghanistan is still a very disconnected country, with very poor infrastructure. This lack of connectivity makes it difficult for the forces in Kabul, to guarantee security and peace, in other cities and regions. Mobilizing the Taliban, or other support forces, to any area in trouble, will be met with logistical and transportation difficulties. Many of the towns and rural areas, have always been in the control of local warlords and militia. In 2001, these warlords stopped their support to Taliban, leading to the quick fall of the Taliban. During their resistance to the US military, in the subsequent years, they rejoined hands with the Taliban, thereby bringing them back to power. If this delicate alliance is broken, Taliban's control will fold in a short notice, bringing instability immediately. Currently, the Taliban acts as the binding force, to a bunch of other terror groups, like the Haqqani Network, Al-Qaeda Corps, AQIS, TTP, Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, and many others. These terror groups can easily turn against each other, creating instability, any moment. The Taliban and most of these terror groups, especially the Haqqani Network, work very closely with the Pakistani army, and their spy agency, ISI. If needed, Pakistan can bring instability to Afghanistan, very easily. The most dreaded Haqqani network, which now controls most of Afghanistan's security, is run by the ruthless Siraj-ud-Din Haqqani and his family. Named by the UN as a terrorist organization, this network was the one that caused maximum suicide bombings against the US armed forces. Al-Qaeda is now a weaker force in Afghanistan, compared to its heydays under Osama bin Laden, but its sister network AQIS is tasked with creating terror in the Western nations, India and Israeli interests. They work closely with the Haqqani network, the Pakistani army, and the Taliban, with their coordination. TTP, an offshoot of the Afghani Taliban, commonly called as the Pakistani Taliban, was initially under the control of Pakistan, but later turned rogue. The TTP looks up to the Taliban and its founders for guidance and support. The much talked about terror network, ISIS-K, also known as ISKP, is a small splinter group of the TTP. They were started as the foot soldiers for the Pakistani spy agency, ISI, and were used as the decoy, before serious terror attacks were made by the Haqqani network against the US armed forces in Afghanistan. Apart from these, there are other Pakistani-trained terror groups who act against India, like Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, and other smaller terror networks, who operate freely within Afghanistan now, whose total number is estimated to be 10,000. To act as the leader of these groups, Taliban needs to show extreme rigidity against women, implement Sharia laws strictly, and deliver ruthless punishments. Any deviation will let them lose control of the country. Despite Taliban's pretense of having toned down, their behavior is exactly the same as in 2001, which may be a requirement to ensure their own survival. If the internal power struggle among the terror groups, and the wars are not enough, there is tribal rivalry as well. Afghanistan is made up of many regions with historically warring tribes, with their unique culture, language, and sect of Islam. Though the Pashtuns are the major tribes, there are many other tribes with significant numbers, like Tajik, Hazara, Uzbek, Aimak, Turkmen, Baluch, Pasha, Nuristani, Kurds, Gujar, Arab, Brahui, Kizilbosh, Pamiri, Kyrgyz, Sadat, and others. Whenever a foreign force invaded Afghanistan, there has been some level of unity among the tribes, only to see it vanish once the foreigners were driven out. The lack of unity among the tribes is another major cause for the lack of stability in the long term. Some of the tribes have found support from internal and external powers, who have their own agenda. Talking about external powers, there are many countries which want to direct, control, and use Afghanistan for their strategic objectives. The United States and their Western allies, China, Iran, Russia, Pakistan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and many other nations, want to steer Afghanistan to their own liking and self-interests. The Taliban's lack of administrative and financial skills have made them heavily dependent on international aid. In the case of the Western powers, they want greater freedom for women as a condition to provide aid. However, such dilution of religious fundamentalism is diametrically opposite to the core foundation of the Taliban. China has demanded military bases in Afghanistan in return for aid. Ironically, Communist China and Islamic Taliban seem to enjoy good friendship for now. Of course, like all Islamic nations, Taliban has turned a blind eye to the brutal crackdowns on the practice of Islam in China, and inhumane atrocities against the Uyghur Muslims. Pakistan has looked at Afghanistan as a satellite state, to develop their region of influence, and use the country as a stage, to attack its main rival, India. Most of the training and support for the Taliban, and other terror groups, including their headquarters, are still in Pakistan. Taliban fondly refers Pakistan as their second home. And Afghanistan is still very heavily dependent on Pakistan, as almost all aid to Afghanistan arrives through Pakistan. The Taliban, the Haqqani network, the ISIS-K, and many other groups, were carefully nurtured by Pakistan to help achieve their selfish objectives. And during the march of Taliban towards Kabul, the Pakistani Air Force provided aerial support, enabling a sudden and rapid takeover of Kabul. This angered the US and the West, who were completely unprepared for such a short notice. They lost a lot of their sophisticated weaponry, and 20 soldiers, during their hurried exit out of Kabul, and everyone is aware that Pakistan was directly responsible for it. And that's the complex web of power structure that control Afghanistan. This makes the country extremely unstable, and may remain so, for some years to come. Thanks for watching.